Hi, this is Jeff with Live, Love, Leave a Legacy. And this is my son David. And he just came home for the holidays and asked if we wanted to do a video together. So tried to brainstorm on what we could do and decided to do a video with memories, especially of him growing up, some funny memories. And then also talk about how we develop our passion, talk about parenting skills, and then also talk about how parenting skills has changed over from one generation to generation, and how he might change his parenting approach from mine and even from my parents and grandparents also. So to start with, we remember a lot of funny things from David growing up, and sometimes he doesn't think they're funny, sometimes they're embarrassing, but we hardly ever had any trouble with David. He was a great kid. Never had any trouble during the terrible twos, the threes, the fours, adolescence. He was really a respectful kid, and we very, very seldom have trouble. But, you know, I remember there were a few times, actually, I'm thinking right now when David was small, it would just melt my heart because I'd come in from work and walk in the front door and I'd hear, "Daddy!" And he'd run up and he'd sit down on my leg and I would walk to the kitchen and he'd ride on my foot. And
Which doesn't always go well. I was in an airport at some point, and my head level's way down here, so my world is looking at people's kneecaps and shins, and so I just saw a hairy leg, and I latched onto it, and it was not my dad. And that man, I'm sure, has a very funny story, but the rest of the time it was probably pretty harmless fun, and you got a nice ankle weight workout in there as well. So.
I forgot about that story, but he said he grabbed on the leg and nothing happened, looked up at the guy and realized it wasn't his dad, and then I came over apparently and picked him up and said sorry, and we went on. But there's a lot of funny things like that we all share, funny moments from our families, and I think it just adds a lot of humor and a lot of insight to things that families go through. But another thing I would do with David is when he was young, I would take him, and all dads seem to do this, we'll throw him up to the ceiling. We had a 14-foot ceiling, and we'd almost get him to that height. And as I threw him up, he'd kind of gasp, and then he'd come down and he's smiling and his hair's flying up. And I'd do that a couple times and set him down, and he would say, he would say again.
Again? I did say again.
He doesn't say again. He said again.
Again.
And he's jumping up and down like he has to go to the bathroom. He's so excited until I would throw him up again. So that was a real enjoyable thing for me, watching him and really connecting with him in those silly little times of father-son relationships, I guess.
There's this really funny picture online that shows how the dad sees it, and he's throwing up the kid, and it's just a couple inches high, and then it's how the kid sees it, and it's a couple feet high. It says how the mom sees it, and it's just
about 40 feet in the air.
Wait. I think it's probably like 14 feet. And you said, we had 14-foot ceilings. I thought, you're throwing me that high? Maybe that's about right. So, man.
That's true, though. Parents, kids, and father, son, and mothers view those things differently. Another thing that I remember is we were playing basketball. David had one of these little plastic hoops in the house, and he was shooting one day, and his Nana called up on the phone, and we said, "Hey, David, you want to talk to Nana?" And he said, "Hey, Nana, watch this." And this is before cell phones. He puts the phone down, and he runs up and makes the basket, and she wasn't able to watch him because there's no phone, but he assumed that since she was talking to him, she'd be able to see him shoot that basket. So that was really funny.
We have that on video, and I actually don't make the shot. I run up, I slam dunk the ball right into the rim, and it just bounces away, and then I fall down a little bit. So it was not good all the way around. But
Nana missed it. She thought you made it. Another one that was hilarious for us is when David was younger, we didn't have, like I said, he was a really good kid, and we didn't have a lot of trouble with him. But occasionally we had to have the heart-to-heart talks with him, and we would, he had trouble maintaining his focus, and so we'd be talking to him, and he'd be looking off to the side, and we'd say, "David, look at us when we're talking to you." And so he'd hold his head there, and
they held my head there because I would say, I am looking at you, and I'd move my eyes everywhere but where they were looking, and so they try and redirect my eyes to look at them, so I'd have to look at them. But
So his face was pointing forward, but his eyes would dart every which way.
yeah.
But another funny story that goes along with that, both him and my previous wife were teachers, and he was in kindergarten or preschool, I'm not sure, but my wife received a call from the teacher saying, I've got to have a discussion with you because David had some inappropriate behavior today. And she said, oh, really? What happened? And she said, well, I was correcting another child, and David took this boy, put one hand on each side of this boy's head and turned his head towards me and said, look at her when she's talking to you. And so my wife started to crack up on the end of the line silently, and she said, we'll definitely take care of this at home and it will never happen again. But it's funny how they learn those lessons and then try to pass those learned behaviors on to other people.
I'm not sure if it was because I was an only child or what happened, but for some reason I tried to act like the adult in a lot of kid-to-kid interactions, and I've gotten in trouble for grabbing people's faces. I've gotten in trouble for, well, picking fights at school, which I think not picking fights, but intervening with bullies, and I've gotten in trouble with, what was the other thing? Oh, two times people have misused playground equipment, which I apparently have no tolerance for, and I've pushed them off of slides. Or there's one kid, we had a swirly slide and they were climbing up backwards and they're kind of looking over the edge, and I said, no, that's not the way the slide works. Grabbed the hands and they fell. I got in trouble for that. That was not the right thing to do. But do you think that's an only child thing, or do most children do that?
It probably could be, because I think a lot of kids learn to be tolerant of those things, where as an only child you grow up with adults and you learn the right way to do it and expect everybody else to do that too, probably. Which brings up another point. When David was younger, he was being harassed by another child, and this is a good life lesson as the story goes on. But he was being harassed by another child, and this happened for weeks, and we kept on telling him, well, just tell the teacher, and that didn't seem to help, so I called the administrator. And they said, well, this is a problem child, the other one, so we'll have a talk with them, and that didn't help. So finally we had a discussion with David and said, sometimes we have to make decisions on our own, look at all the possible outcomes. If I do this, what will happen? If I do this, what will happen? If I do this, what will happen? And we've gone through most of these possibilities already, so I said, sometimes you have to make a decision. I'm not telling you what to do, but at some point you might have to say nothing else is going to work, and you might have to stand up for yourself and make sure that this never happens again, and face up to this child. And so he came home one day and told me what had happened, and I said, well, we're not mad at you because you've done everything you're supposed to do. And prior to this happening, I said, you're also going to have to understand that if you make that choice, you could very well get in trouble and have consequences, but you make that choice based on those consequences that you're already aware of. So he actually ended up standing up for himself, and both kids were taken to the office. He got expelled for 3 days, I think. I think the other kid got expelled for 5 days, I think. But it's one of those lessons where kids learn to evaluate their options, and at some point they run out of options and they have to choose the last option, understanding that it's going to have some negative consequences. So I think life lessons like that are really important for kids at that age, because they go through all of those phases and all those options, trying to make the best choices. And eventually they run out and they have to go to the last option, which isn't the preferred, but it's the only thing that's going to solve the problem. And you do make those decisions knowing that there might be some bad consequences.
There's this great book that by the way, I did not win the fight. I did not do well. He was much bigger than me. So I grabbed him by the backpack and I threw him down. He got up. I did not finish the fight or do anything of consequential value. So he ended up choking me out, and the teachers had to pull him off of me.
But it was the last time he bothered you.
It was. It never happened again. So that was an important lesson there.
That actually happened to me when I was in high school, or junior high, probably 6th, 7th, 8th grade. But I was going to be pitching the next day for a baseball game, and the coach told us to go over and practice, and there were several of us that went over for pitching practice. And so the catcher was wanting to see the ball, and he was type who was kind of antagonistic, and I told him no, and he asked me several times, and finally I gave him the ball, and he took it and threw it as far as he could, and I jumped up on him and took him to the ground, and guys pulled us apart. And this guy had been a bully to lots of people, but after that he was the sweetest guy. He never gave me any more problem. And sometimes, unfortunately, people will push you as far as you can go until you stand up, and then they realize, I'm not going to do that anymore. So again, that's another life lesson.
And it's hard to decide when the right moment is.
Right.
When someone's hitting you in the face, that's clearly the right moment. But when someone's just saying some mean things to you, or somewhere in the middle there's that one ball being thrown may not have been the problem, but was it the problem that he's doing it to everyone all the time,
Right.
and someone had to do something? I don't know. It's a difficult take
Right.
there. What I was going to say earlier is there's this book by a Navy SEAL. We've both read it. If you want to read it, it is a good book. Forewarning, there's a decent amount of profanity in it, so that is a flag. We can probably put a link in the description to the book and everything. I don't remember the name of the author, but he was a Navy SEAL, and the book is called Raising Men, I believe. And it's just talking about raising your sons and your daughters. And one of the things that he advocates, as someone who's highly, highly skilled in violence, is that if you ever have to use violence, it should be the absolute last step. And that generally speaking, if you have to use violence, it's almost seen as a failure in some ways, because a skilled fighter should also be a skilled diplomat, skilled in persuasion. They should be skilled in avoiding and de-escalation. So there are other things to that, but you're right. Sometimes you are left with absolutely no option at the end of the day. So.
And again, those are all part of life lessons that we try to teach our kids. And I am a really big proponent of what's the term that I normally use? Teachable moments. A lot of times kids are going through life, and at particular times in their life, they become particularly sensitive and ready to receive certain types of information. And I think we need to, as parents, we need to be ready and observant of those opportunities, because they are ready at particular times in their life, and if you hit that on the nail, they're going to learn the significance of those decisions much more quickly. So anyway, moving on. Another thing I want to talk about, as David was growing up, we had required him to be in sports early, baseball and basketball, and he played soccer. And we told him he was going to play at least until, I think, 10th grade, and then he'd have choices on what he wanted to do. And he played soccer and basketball until elementary school, I think, and then he continued to play baseball. And he did very well at it. But we found out every year he'd be starting center field, even in high school. But halfway through, he'd always be on the bench. He wasn't playing much. And it wasn't because he's lazy, because he would choose to go out and do 5 o'clock workouts in the morning in the dark at school for strength training. So it wasn't that he was lazy. He just didn't have a drive to be competitive, really, I think.
I think there are two things at play there. I think there wasn't drive in the way that I experienced drive in other areas that I found passion for. But number two, this is not particularly related to the conversation we're having here, but I also had a problem. My mind was sort of clear at the beginning of each season, and the problem would be that I would get in my own head, and I'd be so mad at myself for mistakes that I'd made, and every time I go back to play, I would not get that out of my head, and I would make more and more mistakes, and it was sort of a compounding effect. And then after having a couple of months off, my mind was clear, and I was doing well in practices, and I'd always show up really well at the beginning of the season, but there was obviously something as well that I worked harder in, things that I learned to like later on.
Mm-hmm. And the reason we're bringing this up, because he did play baseball and did well at it from time to time. He had the potential, but he had trouble maintaining that. But I told him eventually, if this isn't something you're really passionate about, which it doesn't seem like you are. We need to find something you're really passionate about. And he didn't want to do it because he liked being a student athlete. He was an academic scholar, and so he didn't want to. He liked that combination of being an athlete and a scholar. But eventually, he did decide to quit baseball. He'd waited until the end of the season, and then he made a decision to go into theater. And actually, in 6th grade, he had a performance, and he got the lead role. And then he did very well, but then he took off and did not perform in theater anymore because all the sports got in the way. But when he decided to quit baseball, he now had the opportunity to do that again, and his first performance, he had a lead role again. So we found out that that was really his passion, and it wasn't just fun for him, but I noticed that it really helped his confidence. He was very at home. Being on stage in front of hundreds of people. He did presentations in high school and college, and he had professors in both that told him that that's absolutely one of the best presentations I've ever seen. So he found his passion, something that developed his confidence, something he really enjoyed, and it was really nice to see that he found something that would help him not only with confidence, but also in his future adult life also.
And, passions change. I love theater, and I don't know that I'd do it again. It's been 6 years since I've acted, and it's not something I'm particularly passionate about anymore. But I still like attention, and I found other outlets for that, and I have other creative outlets that I go to. Something I would like to ask you about, and we haven't discussed this before, at least not at length, is how do you assess the difference between a kindergartner who doesn't want to practice piano because it's more fun to go outside and climb trees, which is another thing that I did, was playing piano, which I also was a passion that sort of fell to the wayside. How do you take the difference between that, where you obviously need to add some structure to a child's life, and then how do you balance that with, okay, they've been doing this for a long time, what if this isn't the right thing for them to be doing? As a parent, how do you
Well, I think it's really important to give the kids, expose them to different opportunities, whether it be music, sports, drawing, art, whatever. I think it's really important to give them a wide variety of things that they participate in, so you can watch them and see what their passions are. We require them to be in sports because I think it teaches determination, focus, develops your physical body, sense of team play and being part of a bigger goal. So I think that was really important for us to teach him. So the sports was really important, but at some point we realized that as they get older, if you see that it's not something they don't like, then I think it's really important to, again, be watching your kids and don't make them do things that they don't want. Find something that really inspires them and teaches those skills some other ways if the things that you're trying to do currently aren't working.
So it's just kind of a feel thing. You have to watch them and know yourself when is a good time. Are there any clues?
If they're not improving, if they get frustrated a lot, if they cry, I think sometimes, even with David, I'd take him out and practice, and sometimes he didn't want to, but I think it's good to teach kids that perseverance is very important. And so I think it's hard sometimes to make a decision as to, is he just not wanting to do this because he doesn't want to do it, or does he really hate to do this? But I think it's important to have structure for kids, and I think they need to learn to do some things that they don't want to do wholeheartedly because it does provide other benefits. So yeah. As a parent, it's something you just have to watch and kind of be intuitive about, I think.
Okay. On that note, and I think this might lead into sort of one of the last things we wanted to talk about, was there are things this goes both ways. There are positive things that your family wants you to do. So, for instance, my dad was an athlete. My mom was a musician, and both of them were teachers, especially science teachers. And so I was enrolled and encouraged in those areas very early on. But I don't know about my mom so much as my dad had negative experiences with other things. You weren't the biggest fan of wrestling with your family, and this is as an adult. I don't know what I would have said as a kid, but I'm an adult. As an adult, I practice martial arts, and I wish I would have started much younger on that. And then part of this is just being in an environment where a lot of people know this, and a lot of my friends are Boy Scouts / Eagle Scouts. Is I wish that I would have done the Scouts. I would like to have those skill sets as an adult. I think about wishing that I had those, but I know that he was forced to go into the Cub Scouts and hated every minute of it. And so that's kind of tough as a parent too. And again, this is 23-year-old David saying that those are things I wish I would have done when I was 7. I don't know that I had those same feelings then about those things. So that can be tough as well, I think. But
Yeah, and so he alluded that we were going to go into something not necessarily more serious, but we just want to discuss how parenting changes over the years. And I look back at my dad and I think, he could have done a lot better job. And I kind of was resentful of some of the ways that he raised us. He was a Marine, and he was kind of controlling, and so that really bothered me. But when I go back and look at his dad was a male chauvinist, and I remember going into their house one time, and he was telling his wife, "Hey, honey, bring me a glass of water, or do this for me." And my dad said, "Well, you can get up and do that." And he said, "No, that's what she's for." And so even though I was a little resentful growing up the way my dad raised me, I look back at what his dad was like, and my dad made tremendous strides over the way he was raised. So I think I've made improvements over what my dad did too, how he raised me. And so my question to David is, what are some things that, reflecting back on your growth, what are some things that you are appreciative of, that you are thankful for from our family, how you're raised, and what are some things that you might change when you have your own kids?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say, and we have discussed this many times, is that I've seen a tremendous growth in your parenting personality, your parenting style throughout my childhood, and based on, there are things that I would change myself based off of how I think that you and Mom were a little bit more forbearing when I was younger, and I think that physical discipline was higher. It occurred more when I was younger, and I wasn't the biggest fan of that. I don't know that any kid truly is. It of course has a place in child rearing, but I don't.
Behavior modification.
Yeah, absolutely.
And no kid likes it, and he didn't get a lot of it either because he was really such a good kid. But you still don't like it, irregardless.
Yeah. And I was told the other day by my mom, you learned fast, so the discipline wasn't required a whole lot. So, but in terms of things I was appreciative of, this is something I don't notice in many families.
Let me back up, because I think a lot of parents don't want to discipline because it's hard for them, and you hear, this is going to hurt me more than it hurts you, and people don't understand that correcting your kids is really difficult, and I think a lot of parents don't do it because it is difficult. But your kids are going to pay a price if you don't teach them how to behave early in life. They'll have difficulties socially later on. They could have trouble with the law and legal issues. So I think it's really important for parents to do those things that are uncomfortable, as far as behavior modification goes early because that helps set the tone very early. In fact, like I said, he didn't even have trouble during the terrible twos because when he wanted to get into the pots and pans, we said no, and we didn't say, oh, that's cute. We said no. So we established what was right and wrong early, and it made it much easier on him as he grew up.
Mm-hmm. I've heard sort of a philosophical perspective on that is your job as parents is not to be the child's friend, it's to raise them into highly functioning members of society. You want them to be the best person possible, and it doesn't matter if they like you along the way or not. And I noticed that I think we were always friendly with each other, and we loved each other, and it was a nice family. However, when I went away to college and I've moved away to Georgia, Florida, Seattle, I've been hopping all over the place, but I've noticed that having left that environment and come back, obviously you're still a source of wisdom in my life, but the sort of active parenting relationship has dissolved more, and we are more friend-like with each other than we once were, because at this point it's I mean, you would obviously intervene if I was making stupid life decisions, but that intensity of the parenting responsibility has gone by the wayside at this point, I suppose.
Well, we did his rite of passage to manhood out of high school, and one of the things I stressed there was, this is no longer a father-son relationship. This is a man-to-man relationship. So I think you got to recognize that at some point and quit treating your son or daughter like a child, and treat them as the adult that they are.
And that, talking about things that I appreciate, that's something that I really do appreciate. Both you and my mom have really treated me like an adult, and I don't feel like I'm being coddled or like I'm being forced to think or act in a certain way. They really respect my life choices, it seems, though I think I've made relatively good life choices. Mm-hmm. But something that I noticed that almost no parents seem to do that I really appreciated about my upbringing, and part of this might have been my personality, and part of this might have been that I was an only child, and so I dealt mostly with adults, and I didn't learn to reason with my fists or pushing or name calling or yelling. We always sat down, and my dad and my mom would explain to me why I am receiving this punishment, saying, that's not something you can do. This is why we're going to do it. And as I got older, it even became, I know you would come to me and you'd say, obviously, you can't do this. This is not okay for you to do. So, you're getting older now, and you understand that there should be consequences for what you do. What do you think an appropriate consequence for this would be? And they always treated me like a little adult. They taught me to, if I'm having a problem with someone, to talk about it, not to throw a fit, to explain to people why you're doing what you're doing. And you just treated me really like an adult, to the point where I have a fiance, and we regularly talk about how we will want to parent our kids theoretically. And she actually criticizes me, saying, because not only am I the youngest person, the only child in this family, in my extended family, I'm the youngest. My cousin is a year older than me, and we're the only two kids in the family, and she's also an only child. So I've never dealt with kids, really. I haven't learned to rationalize and to engage like other kids do. And so it might have gone so far that I think, oh, I won't punish my kids in this way, or won't treat them this way, because I can just treat them like they're rational people. And it might be a personality thing, or it might be that, you have a brother or sister who is wanting to push and fight and yell, and so you might have to realize that not all kids are going to respond that way. You won't be able to parent everyone like they're an adult, because even adult relationships, not everyone behaves like an adult, and they can't just talk to each other. So you have to understand. So when we were talking about physical discipline and talking about like people don't like to discipline their kids, that's something I realize I will have to do. Something I always say is, every toolbox has a hammer, and you can't solve every problem with the hammer, but you can't take the hammer out of the toolbox. You have an incomplete set, and you can't do the right jobs if you take one of the tools out of the toolbox. So You know, if the kid won't respond to you saying, don't cross that busy street, you're going to get hurt. If that doesn't work for them, and you have to swap them and say, no, that's a pain trigger for something dangerous, and their brain's gonna think, oh no, danger if I go near the street. So obviously there's times where you have to do that for their greater good, even if it's not gonna feel great to you. So.
Well, I should preface that too. When they're younger, I think it's really important that you establish what right and wrong is, because a lot of people they say that imprinting occurs on a child before they're 2 years old, and that determines their personality. If you say, oh, that's cute, or we'll deal with that later, when they get to 3 or 2 or 3, that could be too late. So establishing right and wrong and giving them guidance starts when they're born. And I mean, you're not forceful with them, but consistency is the biggest thing with kids. If you're going to decide to do something, then be consistent. Don't be wishy-washy. And obviously, as they get older, you might have to say, you know, what was necessary before may not be necessary now. So obviously, they mature and you can change those things, but you definitely need to be consistent.
I'd never considered that before, but one of my best friends just got a brand new puppy, and you can see how that's important even in that relationship. So the dog bites a lot, and it likes to play bite, and they're trying to train it to not play bite, because it's really cute when it's small and it's 10 weeks old. But the problem becomes, as it gets bigger, it gets less and less cute. And so you can't put it off. You can't say, oh, that's cute, it's not a problem, because it's going to remain a problem. And so it doesn't matter that it's inconsequential then, you still have to train for it now.
That's a good point. There's that comparison between pets and kids and humans. It's a close relationship. You would think, oh, they're completely different, but they're not. If you don't start early, they won't learn those things. They'll be much, much more difficult as time goes on. So anything else about things that you'd like to do with kids, or things that you wished we had done?
No, I have another thing that I appreciate thinking about it. I know that a lot of people talk about how men are raised to act in a supermanly way and they can't show their emotions and things like that. And I came away with a certain amount of that. For instance, my grandfather was a World War II veteran, and he was born in a different era, and I've never hugged that man, and I never will. But I've hugged pretty much everyone else in my family, and I think that you say I loved you to your dad. I say I love you to most of my male friends. There might still be some awkward moments with certain people. Certain people, just if they don't seem emotional, I still feel uncomfortable saying things like that to them. I don't know how it will be received, but I know that I really appreciate that was not. I didn't have that negative association with hugging your dad or saying I love you or anything like that. So I think that was something, especially when I don't think that's really a problem with raising women for the most part. I think that's uniquely a raising men thing. And I mean, there are things that men should do, absolutely, but saying I love you and hugging should be one of them. So I'm glad that I didn't have that side of the be a man sort of raising, and I'm very happy. I think that's actually one of the most special things is I have my friends, my male friends, and we refer to each other as brothers, and we say that we love you and we hug. And I think that's fantastic that can be a part of things, because I remember it might just be a time thing, but 10 years ago I wouldn't have said that to people. So there's something with maturity and it being more okay in society. But
we didn't do that when I was younger too, because it wasn't culturally correct, but it's a lot more open now. And showing your feelings.
So I really don't have many things that I would change, to be honest. Like I said, there's at the very beginning I might pull back on some things, but for the most part I was raised in a really good way, and I mostly just appreciate how I was raised more than anything. So.
Well, there was something I was going to say about, what was the thing you were just talking about 2 minutes ago?
How society raises men?
Now there was a time, and this is another thing that illustrates that parents have to be sensitive. There came a time where he said, "Dad, don't hug me." He became uncomfortable hugging in public. And so I would do it at home, but I wouldn't do it in public, and he's gotten over that. But there is that phase often where boys feel uncomfortable, and we actually watched Tim the Tool Man Taylor, and they went through the same thing. And so Tim was being funny, and he said, well, if you don't like that, he said, why don't we make a code for this? And he said, what do you mean? The boy said, what do you mean? He said, how about when instead of hugging each other, we say, they were Lions fans, Detroit Lions fans, so how about we say, how about those Lions? And so that would be their way of saying, I love you, rather than actually coming out and saying it. So I thought that's funny, and he actually bought me a picture of a little carving of a lion, because that was something that we thought was funny, and we would use that between ourselves for a period of time too.
Mm-hmm. Despite the fact that neither of us are Detroit Lions fans. So.
Is that it?
I think that's all I wanted to say today.
Really quickly, I missed a part here. Some things that I feel like really influenced my parenting skills, and I wanted to share that really quickly. The first one is, and I'm trying to find that. The first one actually was the birth of my son. When he was born, I just got this overwhelming sense of responsibility that his future was going to have a tremendous, my parenting was going to have a tremendous effect on his future. And if I didn't do it right, he was going to be handicapped. So that was the first thing that really had a profound effect on me. And I wasn't irresponsible, but that just hit me like, now I'm responsible for somebody else. The second thing I did was take a 26-week course by Robert Lewis called Authentic Manhood. And this was an amazing course. If you're ever looking as a parent for a good course, this is phenomenal. And he also wrote another book called Modern Day Nights, talk about creating ceremonies for your kids, which I will be doing a video on and a blog at a later time. And the last thing was I taught school for 15 years and became aware that most parents are reactive rather than proactive. So it really became important for me to be a proactive parent, again, because his future depended upon how I raised him. And if I was wishy-washy and reactive, then he's not learning those things he needs to learn to be a good adult with a healthy perspective on life, somebody who can be successful. So anyway, that is the end of it. I see that it says we are on a low battery, so hopefully it is still recording.
It is.
So thank you so much for spending time with us, and anything else?
There was something I was just thinking about. Talking about things I would change / seeing growth in my dad as a parent. I know that at the very beginning of my life, and you never said this to me, this is something my mom has told me that has been a part of the conversation, was that things like dancing or cooking or theater would be weird for a boy to do. However, as I grew and as I said that I was interested in those things, my dad was pretty good about, one, saying that was okay, and I think more than that, instead of just saying that was okay and whatever, you can do that, ignore it, it became more and more of you accepted it and you liked it and you saw the good things that came of it. Mm-hmm. So I think I really appreciated that as well. So there is one more thing to add to that. Oh, just talking about, sorry, this is the very end, we can clip it if we need to, but talking about there's some traditional men things that were in the Modern Day Nights and Authentic Manhood. I can cook, I can do theater, I can not tell my wife to go get the drink for me or whatever, but there are certain things that I think are really good that you train men to do, and be a gentleman, hold open the doors, all those sorts of things.
Give back to others, serve mm-hmm. others, have compassion. That's something that we really tried to instill mm-hmm. in him, and we still try to participate in serving the community.
And I think that protecting is important, even if it's just a bump in the night sort of thing. It's really funny, my fiance will turn to me and just look at me. Nothing on her face says, I intend to go deal with this. It's my job to go up and check out that noise. And you may not be protecting from lions or anything anymore, but you can protect from the noises, and you can do simple little things like searching for an apartment really stresses her out. And it's a small form of protecting her, saying, you know what, I can deal with that because that doesn't stress me out. So there's little things you can do like that, and it's good in its own way. But I moved to Seattle, and I offered to walk the girls to their car late at night, some of her friends, and Amanda is my fiance. She said to me afterwards, "Oh, I don't think people are raised to do that here. I don't think men offer to walk girls through the parking lot at night." And I thought, why? That's crazy. Why would you not train people to do that? But I think that that's a good thing for young men to learn. So, and I was raised that way, and I appreciate that, and that's something I will absolutely instill in my own children. So,
Well, something that just came up, and I can't remember if the quote is correct, but in marriage or a relationship, you really know that you have a good relationship if you're willing to do more for your partner than you receive. And I think that's what really makes a good relationship is that you're not keeping a scorecard and saying, okay, here's my 50%, here's your 50%. You're willing to do whatever it takes, even more than what is done for you. So anyway, we got to go, and we thank you for spending time with us, and hope you got something out of our discussion on parenting and family and so forth. So again, this is Jeff Franklin and David Franklin with Live, Love, Leave Legacy. Have a good day.
and let's end it with "and I love you" and a hug.
I love you.
Love you too.
You know what? I was thinking as we did this,
Uh-huh.
it is so hard